I've been thinking about how much we stand and sit in the service, and I'm trying to figure it out in a lot of ways. Like, the church actually believes that when Christians stand and say prayers and do readings, that it's a reminder of the resurrection. The Greek word for the resurrection is anastasis, which means to stand up. It's literally what it means, to stand up. And so when we do this, when we stand for the gospel and these things, it's supposed to be a living reminder to us that we are people who are held together by Christ's resurrection. And then, I sit there and I think, yeah, but we're not getting any younger and neither are our knees. So just know I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about maybe finding a way to streamline that a little bit. I'm not sure. I'm praying my way through it, just so you know. Well, I'm sure you probably guessed by now. You've seen me lead worship before. You've seen that that you know about my history in the theater. So therefore, you know that I tend to like pageantry a lot. In fact, if it meant that we could have more pageantry on television, I wouldn't be opposed to returning to England. We can be that person again. We can do that. And I know that it's a strange thing to watch these pageants of history that we see. Even in places like Great Britain, there comes this moment where the people from the House of Commons are invited to go to listen to Parliament, and they do this once a year, and they have this whole act put upon it. And basically, the herald from the House of Lords travels his way all the way through Parliament and all the way to the hallway where they keep where the House of Commons is, the common people. And the common people slam the door in his face. And then he has to knock 3 times. And he says, I'm coming from the House of Lords. And they say, go ahead and let him in. And then he says, we'd like to invite you to come to the House of Lords to hear for the opening of Parliament. And then, of course, they make some sort of snide remark back to him. And then they slowly walk back to Parliament, slowly, as a means of showing who's in charge here. And it's us common people. And they've done this for years. They've done it since the abdication of Charles I. Well, not really the abdication, the chopping off of his head of Charles I. It's been happening ever since then, ever since Thomas Cromwell. And I love these things. I love them. I love the pageantry. I love the clothing. I love those things. At my seminary graduation, there's one thing that stands in front of that whole day that bothers me to this day. And that's that they forgot to bring a processional cross to lead us into the sanctuary. It bothers me still. I wrote a letter. It bothered me that much. I'm like, the cross has led me everywhere in my life. Why can't it lead me to my graduation? And they knew that they'd made the mistake. They'd already knew. They'd already heard about it from others. So I know I'm not the only one. But I'm told that we don't have any video of this because you're not allowed to bring video cameras in. But I'm told that the Supreme Court of the United States has a bit of pageantry to it as well. I'm told that when they come into session, the room is completely, the front of the room is completely empty, where the justices sit. And of course, the time comes that the bailiff calls out, hear ye, the Supreme Court of the land is now in session. Please be upstanding. And everyone stands for the justices to enter. And then he says, God bless our republic. And then the justices come in and take their seats. I bet you that's an impressive moment. I really do. I think that must be really, really, and just the words that they say. The Supreme Court of the land is now in session. They don't even bother saying what land. No, everyone knows what land it is. It's just kind of that feeling, And when I read the prayers that we pray today about Ascension Day, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? It's beautiful and it's elegant, and it all wraps around together. The story of the Ascension is an incredible story because it shows just how much Jesus is going to be involved with us. Now, you would think that at a great distance, all the way up in the heavens, in eternity, that means that Jesus is farther away from us. But indeed, the promise of the Ascension Day is one that says that God will be as close to us that he can feel the very breath coming from out of our nostrils. So let's talk about the story for just a minute. It comes to us both at the end of Luke's Gospel and at the beginning of Acts. Now, let's find out who our Bible scholars are. Who wrote Luke's Gospel? Yeah, they would call it Luke's Gospel. It wasn't hard. I know it sounds like a trick question, doesn't it? And who wrote the book of Acts?
Paul.
Nope, it was Luke. Luke wrote both of them. And the book of Acts is kind of like a sequel. And we know this because at the beginning of the book of Luke, he says, in this book, most excellent Theophilus, and in the beginning of Acts, it says, most excellent Theophilus, I'm not going to tell you what happened after Jesus. Right? And in chapter 1 of the book of Acts, we have the story of Jesus ascending into heaven. And he's standing there and he's giving his disciples his final recommendations of what they need to do. Go back to Jerusalem. And when you go back to Jerusalem, God will send his Holy Spirit to you. God will send you a helper that will give you everything you need. But don't go anywhere else until you've been back to Jerusalem. And then as he's speaking, it says that he starts to be pulled up into heaven. And I love this moment. I adore it because I can just imagine it. They're watching Jesus ascend into the heavens. That's, by the way, why we have steeples on churches. Because Jesus said, one day I will return in the same way you saw me go. The steeple reminds you to look up. Could be any day now. But he goes up into heaven, he floats up into the heavens, and as they're watching, they just sort of stand there to such a degree that God has to send 2 angels to remind them, hey, Jesus told you to go back to Jerusalem, guys. I could just see them. Hey, guys, Jerusalem, he said go to Jerusalem. Hey, Jerusalem, in my mind, God had to send 2 angels to get them to stop staring upwards. I think I understand, don't you?
Yes.
And so they return to Jerusalem and they await this marvelous, powerful, incredible spirit that's going to come to them. And they don't know it and they don't understand it yet. But have you ever asked yourself the question, what's Jesus doing up there? I mean, wouldn't it have been better for him just to stay down here and tell us what to do and perhaps lead us to be better people? Well, the reality is his teaching had taken its full effect. And Jesus had a body just like you and I, and he still has that body today. And what happens to Jesus at this moment is that Jesus actually takes his place in heaven. A grand coronation takes place, where Jesus exchanges his crown of thorns for a crown of glory. And from there, he sits at the right hand of God. Now, this is an important place to be. For those among you who love your royals and your royal watchers, the person who was closest to the king was the person who had his ear the most. It was the person who was the strongest, who was the most powerful person in the kingdom. I actually learned that in the medieval period, you're going to love this, the person who had the king's ear most was someone called the steward of the seat. I'll let you guess which seat that was. And his job was nasty. But he also was very intimate with the king, very trusted. And so when people needed a favor, they would go to the knight of the stool, and they would talk to him and tell him what they needed. This person who's so close to the king. Well, from now on, now let's switch this and say, Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God the Father. He's right there at God's elbow. And you know what he does there? He intercedes on our behalf. That's a big fancy word, but basically what it means is to stand between 2 people and to mediate between them. So while the Father is looking down upon, I don't know, I'm going to pick someone randomly, Terry, and says, oh, Terry's committing a sin. Jesus says, yes, Lord, but here's what he's going through. And Lord, Terry does this, and Terry does that, and Terry understands, and Terry will repent. And that's what he's doing for all of us. Pick one. Lord, look what Michael's going through. His dog died. Lord, look at what's happening to him. Oh God, look what's happening to, I don't know, Susie Q. Susie Q's been in a car accident. And from there, Jesus is continually speaking on our behalf to God the Father. That's an important job. It changes everything. It means that in the highest court in the universe, we have someone who speaks on our behalf. We have the best defense attorney you could imagine. We have the one who cares for us and knows intimately what we have gone through and what human life is like and the suffering and the things that happen to us. And Jesus also promises this: I'm not just going to leave you guys abandoned. No, instead, I will send my Spirit to you, and your Spirit and my Spirit will be a helper. The fancy words for it are things like comforter or paraclete, which means comforter. And And that's the promise that Jesus is giving. And by the way, the Spirit will not just be outside of us the way Jesus would be outside of us, but the Spirit would be living and dwelling within us. So next Sunday, when we tell the story of Pentecost, and when we hear that story, we'll hear about how the Spirit has come to live within us. But I want you to remember this one thing from Ascension Day, this last Sunday of Easter. I want you to keep this one thing in your mind. I want you to remember that you have an advocate. You have Jesus, who is sitting at the right hand of God the Father, who is continually taking up for you and speaking on your behalf. That is the that is the consummation of Jesus' entire mission. He wanted to be the one to speak for us, to speak to power what our needs are, to hear our prayers and to translate them to God the Father in such a way that we're heard and we're seen, and yes, we're forgiven. So when you or our church go through a difficult time, and they're sure to come, and they're sure to go, when these things happen, just know that Jesus is speaking on your behalf. Jesus is remembering who you are. Jesus is taking up for you. And you can't have a better advocate than that. Our next hymn this morning is number 308, Thine is the Glory.